everyone. So welcome to another mini lesson right before Thanksgiving break. We'll keep this one short and sweet. In this lesson, we're going to be talking really quickly about sort of motors in general. So I'm going to give like a quick overview of all the three types. The robot motor limit, how many motors you're supposed to have on a robot. Pros and cons of 5.5 watt motors, which are some new motors that came out I think just last year. And then addressing motors when they overheat. So just to get into it, here's a really handy table that I made that allows us to sort of visualize three different types of motors. These are the different cartridges. You can put them in a motor like so. And you can tell what color the motor is by this little band here. And so there's three main types of motors. So there's the red motor, which spins at 100 RPM, the green motor, which spins at 200, and the blue at 600. So when you spin slower, remember we talked about this when we were talking about speed, torque, and gear ratios. When you have something that spins a lot slower with the same power, it means that it has a lot more torque and allows it to spin with much more force. And therefore, for applications such as lifts and catapults and slides, things that require a lot of energy to pull back or load, that the red cartridges are perfect for that. The green motors are sort of the middle of the line. They're for all-purpose stuff, so you see them a lot in dry bases and most other subsystems that aren't lifts and stuff, or intakes and stuff. And then blue motors, these spin really fast. These spin at 600 RPM, and so they're speed-based, opted for pretty experienced teams that use these in their drive bases to help have a much faster, more robust drive base. But you also see these very often in intakes and flywheel launches because they're speed and it doesn't require as much torque needed, and rather it's more focused and geared towards speed. So, really quickly, these are sort of the different types. This is like a lot of information here, but the main thing you need to know is that here we have the 100 RPM, the torque. You have the 200 RPM, and then we have the 600 RPM. And you can see on this graph, as a function of sort of the max RPM here, you can see that the red has for sure the most torque while it gets smaller as you go faster. And that sort of just demonstrates that more torque comes with sort of the red, and while more speed comes sort of with the 600 RPM. So really quickly, does anyone know how many, well it actually says right here. So can someone tell me how many like 11 watt motors you can put on your robot that's legal?
8?
Yeah, 8. So it says right here, power of combined motors of all 11 watt and 5.5 watt must not exceed 88 watts. And so they call these 11 watt and 5.5 watts because of sort of the amount of the power that they need. So these big ones are the 11 watt motors and these are the 5.5 watt motors. And so you can see sort of how interchangeable they are. So you get a maximum total of 88 watts. So for example, if you're using 6 11 watt motors, then you can use up to 4 5.5 watt motors. And this you can sort of like piece that together and see what applications you need and which type of motors you need. And so this is super helpful when you're trying to determine, hey, like how many motors should I need, what type of motors can I put, and how can that be legal? If it isn't, how can I reduce some of that motor count? And this is super important because I've seen a lot of teams not actually go up to that 88 watt limit, and you should almost always, you should definitely always go up to the 88 watt limit. If you don't know what to use the additional motors for, I suggest highly that you add them to your drive base, or you create other subsystems that you can use more motors for, because you want to use as much power as you can. And so making sure that you utilize all the motors that you are allowed to is a super key step in making sure you have a competitive robot. So these motors, like I said earlier, they're 5.5 watt motors, and they came out I think last year, but there are some definitely pros and cons of these motors, and I'm going to talk through them really quickly. So some of the pros here are it's obviously smaller and lighter, so it has a smaller form factor, and therefore, and also you can have 2 of these for every one of these. So it allows you to distribute power across your robot much easier. It also allows you to create more subsystems. So instead of having to use an 11 watt motor for every subsystem, you can say, okay, well this subsystem doesn't require too much power, right? So I'm going to use a small motor and save sort of that 5.5 watt that I can use somewhere else. Additionally, when you're saying, say something like a drive base, right? It's very symmetrical. If you have 2 motors on this side, you need another 2 motors on that side. Otherwise, your drive is going to be kind of crooked when it drives forward, right? So before these came out, it was basically impossible to get a 5 motor drive base, right? Because if you have 2 here, to here, that's 4, right? Where are you going to put the extra motor? So these allow for the existence of 55-watt drive bases because you can put one of these on either side, which makes them balanced. And so that's something that's super cool and something that I can use. Some of the cons of this, however, are you know how there's different cartridges that you can put into these that put it in different speeds, right? You can customize them. These you can't. These only spin at 200 RPM. You can't change them. You're not allowed to change them. And that's kind of what you have to work with. So for example, if you need something that's a lot more torque-based, perhaps it's a little more complicated because you need to gear it down or gear it up. For example, if you need something like a fast intake. Additionally, as you can see here, it's kind of hard to see, but this only fits with a low-strength axle. You can't put a high-strength axle on this. So even if you really wanted to try. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're designing it. If you need a subsystem that requires a really big axle, then perhaps this isn't a thing for you. And also, with motors comes more wires and more code to needed to make the robot function. So that is also something to keep in mind, though it's not too bad. And finally, this is also something to note. 2 5.5-watt motors in terms of power is always weaker than one 11-watt. So even though they keep the same sort of, I guess, wattage, filling that requirement up, these are actually slower and actually worse because they have a lower stall torque and actually burn out faster. So that's just something to keep in mind. Really quickly, I want to talk about how we address overheated motors. So these are brush motors. So that means that they overheat pretty quickly. So there's code in here that you can't change that basically limits the motor speed in order to make sure that the electronics don't get fried. So at 45 Celsius, when they heat up to that much, it actually cuts the torque in half, and it continues to cut that as it gets hotter. And so whenever you have your drive base or your mechanism moving slower than it should, it's probably because your motors are overheated. So ways you can remedy this are, one, use some upside down compressed air. So let me get the compressed air really quick to demonstrate. So this is your standard sort of duster type thing. So this is just sprays air. But when you turn this upside down, hopefully I don't give myself frostbite, but you can see how it sort of creates a jet of really cold air. And that's how you can cool these down pretty quickly, as you can feel these. After I sprayed them, they're a lot colder. So that's something you can do. But these are pretty expensive. I think 2 of these were $15 or something like that. So we don't want to use this unless in emergencies, because it's really not cost effective. Another way we can sort of address this is hot swappable motors. So you can see that this motor is sort of taken apart here. And so most motors are held together by screws, but what you can do is if they're overheated, you can actually swap out these for another one of these. So imagine that this is really overheated. We can take another one of these and you can put them back on, and that allows you to swap them really quickly without having to actually cool it down. And so the way you hold these together is traditionally use a rubber band. So that holds these, sorry for the pump over there, but you can see how this holds it together, and the mechanism basically is similar to screws. So you can see how you can swap these out, but it still holds it in place. So that's something super cool. You can see an alternative solution here using zip ties. You can also do that, though you probably have to reuse the zip ties. You can't reuse the zip ties. Another thing that we use very often is just putting the entire robot on a fan. So if you were there at the competition this weekend, you saw the fan we brought, you put the entire robot on it. It allows you to cool everything on the robot together, and it's super easy, and you can just put it on whenever you're not using it. And that is just a super cost-effective and easy way. It's a little slower than using compressed air, but ultimately, I think it's probably the best solution to cool down your stuff. And I believe that is it. So, you guys have any questions, come find me after, but thank you guys so much.